Let's rewind the clock to 1937, a year of rising tension and gathering storms across the globe. In the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin's Great Purge was at its peak. A terrifying wave of repression swept through the country, with millions arrested, executed, or sent to labor camps. This brutal campaign not only solidified Stalin's power, but also crippled the Red Army's leadership, a weakness that would have dire consequences just a few years later. Meanwhile, in Asia, the Marco Polo Bridge incident ignited the full-scale Second Sino-Japanese War. This brutal conflict would rage for 8 long years, causing immense suffering and fundamentally reshaping East Asia. In Europe, the dark clouds of war were also forming. Italy, under Mussolini, had recently completed its brutal conquest of Ethiopia, a move that defied the League of Nations and signaled the weakness of international diplomacy. And in Spain, the Civil War saw a horrifying new tactic of modern warfare, the bombing of Guernica by German and Italian air forces. A deliberate attack on civilians shocked the world and became a grim symbol of the brutality to come. 1937 wasn't just another year. It was a dress rehearsal for World War II, with the battle lines being drawn and the world holding its breath. Let's rewind the clock to 1937. A year teetering on the brink of global chaos. The world was a pressure cooker, and the heat was being turned up from multiple directions. In the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin's Great Purge was at its terrifying peak. High-ranking military officers, intellectuals, and anyone deemed a threat were systematically eliminated. This wasn't just internal paranoia. It was a brutal consolidation of power that left the Red Army severely weakened, a fact that would have dire consequences just a few years later. Stalin was forging a state built on fear, sending shockwaves of unease across Europe. Meanwhile, the last embers of Ethiopian resistance were being stamped out by Mussolini's Italy. Having invaded in 1935, Italian forces were now solidifying their brutal occupation. Emperor Haile Selassie had pleaded with the League of Nations for help, but his words fell on deaf ears. The world watched as a sovereign African nation was violently colonized. A chilling demonstration of the League's impotence and the boldness of fascist ambition. Look over to Spain, and you'd see a nation tearing itself apart. The Spanish Civil War was a brutal proxy war for the ideologies clashing across Europe. Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy threw their support behind General Franco's nationalists, using the conflict as a testing ground for new weapons and tactics. The Soviet Union backed the replicants, but the Western democracies, like Britain and France, clung to a policy of non-intervention. They were terrified of provoking a wider war, a fear that paralyzed them into inaction. The bombing of Guernica in April 1937 became a horrific symbol of this new, terrifying form of warfare aimed at civilians. But the biggest explosion of 1937 happened in Asia. In July, a skirmish at the Marco Polo Bridge near Beijing escalated into a full-scale invasion of China by the Empire of Japan. This wasn't just a border dispute. It was the beginning of the Second Sino-Japanese War, a conflict of unimaginable scale and brutality. The Japanese military swept through northern China, and by the end of the year, they had reached the capital, Nanjing. What followed was one of the most horrific atrocities of the 20th century. So, where were the so-called leaders of the free world? In Britain, Neville Chamberlain became Prime Minister, a man who believed he could reason with dictators. In America, President Franklin D. Roosevelt was focused on the Great Depression at home. He gave a speech calling for a quarantine of aggressor nations, but the American public was overwhelmingly isolationist. No one wanted another Great War. 1937 wasn't the year the World War began, but it was the year the battle lines were drawn in blood and iron. It was a year of violent expansion, ideological clashes, and a devastating failure of international will. The path to 1939 was being paved, and the world was unknowingly marching straight down it. Thanks for watching. If you found this glimpse into the past interesting, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into history. See you next time. By mid-1937, power struggles and calculated brutality were reshaping the globe. In Berlin, Hitler convened secret councils, his eyes gleaming with the certainty of destiny. Maps sprawled across polished tables showed Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland nations that could provide the living space he demanded. Generals whispered about the risks. Diplomats cautioned about Britain and France. But Hitler's ambition outpaced caution. Every decision was a gamble. Every alliance a stepping stone toward domination. Mussolini, watching from Rome, measured Italy's gains against Germany's bold strategy, weighing the symbolism of joining the Anti-Comintern pact against the practical consequences of leaving the League of Nations. Meanwhile, Stalin's purges intensified. Officers, engineers, and intellectuals disappeared overnight. Secret trials in Moscow became grotesque spectacles, confessions extracted through fear and torture. Even those who had once shared meals or whispered ideas with Stalin were now branded enemies. The Red Army, decimated at the top, scrambled to maintain order and readiness. Paranoia fueled strategy, and every misstep could mean death, not just for the accused, but for families and colleagues. Ordinary citizens learned the rhythm of fear. Curfew, whispered warnings, vanished neighbors. The machinery of control and terror created a world where survival depended on silence, caution, and luck. Across the seas, Japan escalated its campaign in China. After the Marco Polo Bridge incident, troops advanced relentlessly. Cities fell with terrifying speed. Shanghai became a theater of destruction, with Japanese bombers leveling neighborhoods and artillery reducing streets to rubble. Civilians fled into alleyways, abandoned warehouses, or makeshift shelters. The international community reacted with shock but little intervention. Even Roosevelt's warnings felt powerless against the overwhelming force of imperial ambition. Every step the Japanese army took reshaped the balance of power in Asia, forcing China into a desperate defensive stance, improvising alliances, and relying on courage against a better armed enemy. In Spain, the conflict sharpened into cruelty and strategy. Republican forces fought desperately to hold Madrid, coordinating scattered units against nationalists equipped with superior arms and Italian advisors. The siege intensified, with artillery shaking walls and bombing raids leaving civilians trapped in crumbling buildings. Yet, even in these desperate circumstances, moments of human resilience emerged. Underground networks smuggled food. Doctors operated in candlelit basements. Children learned songs that defied fear. Each day felt like a tightrope walk between hope and annihilation. The wider world trembled as these conflicts intertwined. Germany and Japan observed each other's successes. Hitler and Mussolini adjusted calculations, and Roosevelt navigated isolationist pressures at home. Diplomats attempted delicate maneuvers, but none could hold the tide of militarization, ambition, and fear. Across continents, individuals, soldiers, mothers, teachers, merchants grappled with immediate danger, while unknowingly standing at the edge of history's turning point. Small decisions, postponed attack, a whispered warning. A tactical retreat created ripples, with consequences far beyond the battlefield. By the end of the year, the pattern was unmistakable. Alliances were forming. Ideologies hardened, and the machinery of war and repression accelerated. Ordinary lives were subsumed by extraordinary forces. Every victory and defeat, every execution, every bombardment shaped the trajectory of nations. Humanity teetered between resilience and collapse, a world caught in the violent dance of power, strategy, and ambition. As the globe edged closer to catastrophe, one truth became evident. History was no longer a distant abstraction, it was alive, immediate, and unforgiving. The year's turmoil left scars that no maps or treaties could capture. Families across continents grappled with the immediate aftermath of decisions made in distant halls of power. In Moscow, mothers wept for sons executed as enemies of the state. Fathers disappeared into labor camps, where frostbite and starvation dictated the rhythm of survival. Streets echoed with the silent fear of neighbors, each glance over the shoulder a question: who might vanish next? The machinery of terror transformed ordinary routines into acts of careful calculation, turning homes into prisons of anxiety and whispered suspicion. In Shanghai, the wreckage of war revealed both horror and resilience. Civilians sifted through ruins for anything salvageable: a child's toy, a family photograph, a scrap of clothing. Amidst the ash and rubble, communities banded together to survive, creating makeshift kitchens and secret clinics. Soldiers on both sides witnessed human suffering that no strategy had prepared them for. Desperate pleas, impromptu aid, moments of compassion amidst violence. Every day blurred the line between heroism and endurance, as ordinary humans carried extraordinary burdens. Spain's cities told a similar story. In Madrid, even as bombers rained destruction from above, citizens held on to fragments of normal life. Teachers gathered children in basements to continue lessons. Street musicians played to lift weary spirits, and neighbors shared what little food remained. Yet hope coexisted uneasily with despair. Letters carried news of loved ones, lost or imprisoned. Whispers circulated about betrayals and shifting allegiances. Human ambition, ideology, and survival intertwined in ways that made the personal inseparable from the political. Meanwhile, in Italy and Japan, ordinary citizens witnessed the triumphs of their governments, shadowed by moral compromise. Propaganda glorified conquest and loyalty. Yet every victory was tempered by the cost of human suffering and the quiet erosion of empathy. Soldiers and civilians alike wrestled with internal conflicts, pride and guilt, fear and resolve, duty and conscience. Their stories hidden, fragmented, yet persistent created the texture of history. The lived experience behind headlines and statistics. By year's end, the consequences of ambition, paranoia, and conflict had reshaped human experience across the globe. Societies were fractured, trust diminished, and the price of survival weighed heavily on every individual. Yet even amidst devastation, resilience persisted. Small acts of courage, quiet defiance, and enduring compassion illuminated a world teetering on the edge of catastrophe, proving that humanity persisted even in the darkest chapters of history. As 1937 drew to a close, the echoes of ambition, terror, and resilience had begun to shape the world in ways that would last far beyond that year. Cities rebuilt over rubble, societies struggled with fractured trust, and the stories of survival, courage, and loss became the invisible threads connecting generations. The decisions of a few leaders had rippled outward, touching millions of ordinary lives, leaving lessons etched into the collective memory of humanity. We see in this history not just the horrors of war or the cruelty of unchecked power, but the enduring human capacity to endure, adapt, and sometimes to resist. Families preserved memories, communities nurtured hope, and individuals refused to let fear define them entirely. The past, though distant, informs the present. The struggles of 1937 remind us that vigilance, empathy, and moral courage are never optional. Looking back, the human experience within these massive forces of politics, ideology, and conflict reveals patterns that repeat across time. Every empire, every government, every society must grapple with the tension between ambition and ethics, power and compassion. By understanding these moments, we gain insight into ourselves and the world we inhabit today. History is not a closed book. Its legacy lives in every choice we make, in the stories we tell, and in the courage we summon when faced with uncertainty. We inherit both the mistakes and the resilience of those who came before. And in that inheritance lies the power to shape a more conscious future.